Welcome to the 2022 Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, our 35th anniversary, presented by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. You're about to learn from some of the top saltwater anglers in the country. Now, the key to getting the most from the seminar series is to listen to the little subtleties, the adjustments that we are doing when the fishing is tough. This is what we like to refer to as the golden nuggets of the seminar series. We're about ready to get underway, so let's get right down to it.
Coming to you from the IGFA in South Florida, it's the 35th Annual Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Now, here's George Poveromo.
Welcome to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, edition 2022, a special session that we're dedicating to the Florida Keys. One of the Florida Keys' most popular inshore and backcountry fish is tarpon, and that's the subject of this panel. We have, from Bud and Mary's Marina, Captain Jim Willcox, one of the premier backcountry guides, and sitting next to Jim from the Rockledge Mosquito Lagoon area, Ashley Weber, who fishes tarpon in her waters, but also ventures into the Florida Keys to chase the fish. And my friend out of Miami, Harry Vernon III, who also gets down to the Keys to fish for tarpon. And we're going to put a unique slant on this. We have our Florida Keys expert on tarpon, Captain Jim Willcox, and I put Ashley and Harry on, even though they're from different areas. We're going to play point counterpoint, sort of, and talk about some of the tried and true tarpon tactics of the Florida Keys and how maybe some other tactics that might work in Mosquito Lagoon or off Miami might work in the Keys. And Jim Willcox might even be the judge on this one. So anyway, let's get right down to it. Now, Jim, there are a number of ways you fish for tarpon or people fish for tarpon. You have the fly rod crowd that they just wait for that, but the majority of the vacationers or the people who venture down with their own boats or even charter guides, they want to hook up on the fish, whether it's spin tackle or bait cast tackle, and have fun catching the tarpon. So tell me a little bit about the peak seasons for tarpon in the Florida Keys.
Well, if you're coming down in your own boat, it used to be April, May, June, but now where the weather's a little different, it could actually start in February or March.
Really? So
but for somebody new to the Keys, the safest thing to do is fish around the bridges. You know, that way you don't have to run back in the backcountry, worry about running aground. I actually catch tarpon on the coldest days of the year in the backcountry up in the creeks. Now, these are small resident fish.
Sure.
They could be from 5 to 40 pounds. And for me, actually, they're more fun. They jump more. They're more active. You're in a smaller area.
Oh,
you're not surrounded by other boats. You're not dodging the bridge. But if you're in your own boat and you're coming to the Keys, the best thing to do is fish around the channels and the bridges. In the springtime.
And that sort of relates a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong, with some of the fishing that you do back in Mosquito Lagoon, Ashley, some of that, the shallower water fishing for them as well?
We have a larger, run in the fall time after the migration, a little bit farther south off the beach, but I tend to stay in the backcountry. I really, like he said, I like to be away from the boats and in this shallower, backcountry fishing, and I've just really fallen in love with sight fishing. I mean, there's nothing cooler than watching a tarpon come blow up on like an artificial bait or a fly just a few feet from the boat, and it's so acrobatic, and it's just a really fun experience, especially for a new angler.
And the times that you target them down in the Florida Keys, when do you normally go down there on your schedule?
The oceanside migration is obviously, the most hot time to be down there. My favorite time has really become, late February when there's not as many boats down there, and you can see some fish like in smaller groups out in the Gulf side, and they tend to be floating and a little bit happier. And you get some cool shots with not very many boats around.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Jim, let's break this down more. You're on these backcountry tarpon, the smaller one. And somebody's going back out there, you have clients, they want to get them on light spin tackle, maybe some artificial lures. What sets up the right scenario in that backcountry? Is obviously certain tides, is it more moving water? And then as far as what are you pitching to them, the presentation, give me some of the subtleties involved in trying to make that work.
Well, it's moving water, and in these curvy creeks, they're typically on the outside bend. That's where the deeper water is because of the current. And they like to sit in the backwater too, just like a snook. They don't want to be fighting the current all the time. And if you see them rolling or boiling a little bit in the area, I free line a live shrimp to them. That's the best way to trick them.
Okay.
A lot of times they'll hit the jig while you're jigging, but if you can free line a live shrimp and he swims down on his own, that's a killer bait.
All right, so now when you're doing
pilchards, mullet, we use all that stuff too.
Are you like either staked out up on the shallower and doing this in the channels, or are you just drifting along as well?
We're staked up in a spot.
Okay. and then you're just pitching up the live shrimp.
We're catching them right where we're catching the redfish and snook. They all hang out in the same area.
And what are you doing differently as far as leaders for the tarpon versus the scope?
30, 40 pound leader in the backcountry is plenty.
If somebody wanted to start catching those fish in that scenario, bucktails bounced with that current versus maybe a swimming or topwater plug. And I'm going to let you stew on that for a second until we go to commercial break and come back. But I want to check out the artificial aspect of that as well. You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, the Florida Keys Tarpon Session from the IGFA. We'll be right back.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Simrad. Go with Simrad and go with confidence. Penn, let the battle begin. Sirius XM Marine, weather, fish mapping, and entertainment for anglers. Mercury Outboards, go boldly. Angle, portable fridge freezers and high-performance coolers. George will be right back. Welcome back to the 35th Annual Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
Welcome back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series and the Florida Keys Edition Tarpon Session from the International Game Fish Association. I'm in a discussion with Captain Jim Willcox, talking about some of the smaller backcountry tarpon. He's mentioning that you're staked out and you're talking about live lining shrimp to go with that current. But if somebody wanted to be more on the purist side, using artificials, non-fly rod, but say spin tackle, was it bucktails, topwater, swimming plugs? What would be the best scenario?
Topwater early in the morning. We did that
Sure.
a couple of years ago. Okay, the topwater thing is early in the morning. Once the sun gets up and the wind starts blowing, not so much. Artificials, they like artificials when they're swimming in a school off the beach. You can throw a storm at them, a sluggo, any kind of a twitch bait, something like that.
What are the subtleties involved in working that topwater plug? Do you throw it, you pop, you pause, is a constant retrieve? Take me through the subtleties.
Just like your bass fishing. I mean, pop, let it sit. Sometimes they hit it when it's sitting, sometimes they hit it when it's popping.
And what pound test lead are you running to those top
Same
waters?
thing, 30, 40. If the
pounds.
fish are bigger, like the one behind you, you want to have 50 or maybe even 80.
And does color make any difference with topwater plugs or the size of the topwater plug itself?
Well, if you can match the hatch, that's all the better, But sometimes I think if they're eating a certain size bait and you throw something in there different, they might respond to that better than they would if you throw something in there that looks just like everything else.
Gotcha. Harry, let's go back into you two. You've done your fair share of tarpon fishing throughout the Florida Keys too, and you're more of fishing around the channels and the bridges, more the offshore. And some of the scenarios to get or to be successful at that would be what?
Just live bait. I mean, if I'm fishing the bridges at all, live bait. Live mullet. I don't like the real gigantic ones, like this, medium sized to small. Live crabs. You can't beat a live crab. And when you're using a live crab, though, it's strictly free lining it. If you put it in the rod holder and have a crab skipping across the water, I can't remember ever getting a bite. So it's just something that you got to have someone on the rod, free line it, let it go steady with the current. And just as it gets right to the bridge, normally those tarpon will blow up on a crab.
And with the Keys Bridge, if you're fishing at, in a lot of cases, you're anchored up current of it.
Yep.
You're running your float with like a slip float that you could work to certain depths.
If I'm just free lining a crab, it's no float. But
right.
if I'm live baiting with mullet, I'll have some with floats, some without floats. I'll put a lead and drop it right at the bottom, because a lot of times, I don't know if you've ever seen some of those cameras. They have cameras on the bridges, and they're underwater cameras. And they're all at the bottom. They're all just laying around in the bottom, just milling around and getting a bait down near the bottom. A lot of times you get those bottom baits. So I'll use like a 4-ounce lead, depending on where you're going to set up around the pilings and stuff like that. But it's personal preference. But get some really good bites straight off the bottom. Lock up, circle hook in the rod holder.
And actually, fishing the channels or bridges, again, what would be some of your tactics?
Live mullet would probably, if I had to, go out and get it done, I think medium to small sized mullet. And I think it's important to figure out if they're, hanging out on the bottom more time, if it's colder, if they're busting on the surface, then, there's different ways to hook the mullet. Like if you want them to sit on the bottom, you kind of want to hook it through the nose. But if you need it to be up towards the surface, if they're, busting on the surface early in the morning or at sunset, then I think hooking it through like the back, right behind its back fin, is the best way to keep it towards the top of the water column. It's just those little subtleties with figuring out where they're sitting in the water column that day or that time that, can really make a really big difference with getting a bite.
Jim, let's circle back. I want to focus again on the Keys Bridges. That's a very popular setup. It's easy for a lot of anglers to do because they can see the bridge. They don't have to try to figure out how to get to the backcountry and find these creeks and all. So what are some of the subtleties of being successful at catching tarpon from the bridges in the Florida Keys?
Well, it's not so subtle anymore.
No, I know that.
It used to be live mullet. Now it's buckets and chunks. So
Yeah.
get yourself a
Buckets and
bunch of dead mullet, cut them up, and
Sure.
start pissing everybody off and throwing them in the water behind your boat.
Let's elaborate on that. Let's
That's
elaborate.
bridge fishing.
Your anchor.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
One more thing I tell people about tarpon fishing at the bridge is they feed twice a day for 20 minutes. You better hope we're there then.
Oh, that's for sure.
Because they'll shut down. They could be rolling all over. Just because they're rolling doesn't mean they're biting.
100% too. And, I have done that several times. And the most recent that I've done, Andrew Tipler and I, we had done the bridge deal, and it looks like Interstate 95. You need to get there just to get your span. And when you hook up a tarpon and you throw your
Yeah, it's
anchor
like
and
going
you're
to a New
floating
York
out
Jets
there,
game. There's a lot of screaming and yelling.
it's like going
Jersey
to a
in the old
carnival
days.
and you're in a bump
Jersey in the
car
old days.
set. It's like,
Let me
really
ask you a
quick.
question.
Yeah,
How long ago did Bass Pro open?
I'm not sure.
How many years ago? 30, 35?
Not even sure,
Well,
but
I'm
I'll
gonna tell
tell
you
you
a story.
what, we're going to go to commercial break. Let me think, or at least
And then
Google
I'm
it.
gonna tell you a story,
I'll
all
come
right.
back to you right after commercial break. You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the International Game Fish Association. We'll be right back with the correct answer to Jim's question, I think, after the commercial break.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Rapala, your best shot at a world record. Suffix, always use the best line. VNC, your expert in hooks. Williamson Lures for the pelagic playground. Starbright, blending technology with performance since 1973. George will be right back. Welcome back to the 35th Annual Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
Welcome back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series. The topic, Florida Keys tarpon. And we're coming back, Jim Willcox stumped us on the question, was when Bass Pro Shops purchased the Worldwide Sportsman in Islamorada. And I was at that grand opening, and we couldn't really find the year. I'm going to say it was in the 90s, but hopefully Johnny Morris will text in and let us know for sure. But the point of this being what, Jim?
Well, I'm going to tell you what a tarpon will do to a person. I caught my first tarpon maybe 30 years ago in Islamorada with a guide, and a little smaller than the fish behind you. It was about a 50-pound fish. I mean, it jumped. We got it to the boat. We got it. It was small enough we were allowed to pick it up, and you're probably allowed to bring in big ones in the boat back then. We got it in the boat, got a picture. We caught one snook the rest of the day. Then we went back and tried to catch a bonefish. We never caught it. But, I mean, it was the best day of my life, okay, my first tarpon. I went to Bass Pro Shops. I got a pair of tarpon flip-flops. I got a tarpon belt. I lived in Pennsylvania then. I went back to PA. I wore my tarpon flip-flops with socks on in the snow all winter long. That's what a tarpon will do to a guy.
Yeah, I know.
And then I moved here.
Yeah, I know. And I fished you about 3 different times already, and so that tarpon really warped you, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Yes, it
Okay.
did.
Let's talk about working the soft plastics. Okay, if you're lined up on these bridges and everyone is doing the crabs and the live bait pretty much, can you still have a shot at getting those fish on any kind of artificials in that scenario?
Not when it's crowded like that. I mean, you can't, it's possible. You can have one guy casting all day. He might get a couple bites. One tip for the guy in his own boat is to get out there at 4 in the morning and drift your crabs. Get out there before everybody else does. Either do it later.
Now you're talking
or
about the
earlier.
drifting in the through
Yeah,
channels.
I mean, sometimes it's a sunset thing. Everybody thinks it's a sunset thing. Well, it's also a real early morning thing. If you want to beat the crowds, get out there at 4 in the morning.
And Harry, drifting the channel with live crabs, what are the subtleties there? Jim was talking about the backcountry where you're letting the shrimp just roll with the current. What are the approaches when you're actually drifting with crabs?
If I'm
and you're not
drifting with a
anchored?
crab,
Yes.
then I will, if the boat's moving, then I'll put it on a float. I'll use like a 6-foot float and a 6-foot leader to the crab.
Roughly what pound test?
I use 60-pound, 80-pound. Just if I'm not getting a bite, I'll downsize. I'll go down to 40 fluoro. But normally I'll fish 60-pound mono leader, and I'll use 8 feet probably leader normally to a float, to a popping float, and free. And not only do you tarpon bite, but you get a lot of permit using a crab,
So
which
you're
is really
drifting
good.
along and you're keeping these on floats and the crab's drifting along with you on the boat.
We'll let it out. We'll get it away from the boat.
Sure.
I've had them eat right next to the boat. Literally, I mean, blow up, you get wet and all that. So,
But then once it gets to the position that you want, do you bring it back and free spool it, or you leave it there?
No, you
All
can
right.
just leave it in the rod holder and drift.
And you're drifting, and you've got your floats in position. Do you take a free working rod and just drift that with a current, then reel it back in and just keep working a rod that way at all?
I'll do when I'm fishing tarpon. when I'm out, I get my 4 lines out, one bombed way out, and then a little closer, a little closer, a little closer. I'll put one without a float, just straight right below the boat almost, just drifting out probably 12, 15 feet, and that one gets hit a ton, and you're just doing it. Now, if I'm in an area where I see the tarpon rolling, I'll grab a nice big old popper, and I'll throw that out, and I'll pop that. And I've caught them on the little twitching wraps. These little guys, twitching mullet. These things are so deadly now. Look, I mean, they look so real now. Today, the technology that Rapala is doing on these guys, and what's great about them is these single hooks now.
Right.
I mean, I'm a big fan of treble hooks because I like snagging everything, whatever swims by. I don't care. But these baits swim so good. Get something like this out and just twitch it, twitching mullet, and just they inhale these little guys. So it's a lot of fun. But man, I throw out everything. You know, the only way to catch them is, and otherwise you're just sitting there. I'm kind of bored. So either I'm going to throw it, or my buddy, or whoever's out on the boat. Here, cast, start doing something. Work. You know, you'll catch other species, and it's a fun way of fishing.
Gotcha. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll come right back to this topic. You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, the session on catching Florida Keys tarpon. We'll be right back after the break.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Columbia Sportswear. Stay cool and protected while fishing. JL Audio, ahead of the curve. ACR, building survival products since 1956. Florida Keys and Key West. Visit flakeys.com. George will be right back. Welcome back to the 35th Annual Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
Welcome back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series. Your favorite way to fish tarpon in the Florida Keys is what?
As far away from people as I can get, way up a creek. Just me and the fish.
That's a good technique if you can master it.
That's it.
You know?
That's the best.
People bug me more than the bugs, so I'd rather be far away.
I mean, any preference you have? If Jim Willcox just want to go by himself and catch tarpon, what would that be?
Yeah, well, I got a lot of spots where they live. I mean, you know, most tarpon in the Keys are not migratory. They live there. And when you're out there every day, you figure out where they live. And they have a daily pattern just like people. So if you get there and they're there.
So where I'm going with that is technique-wise, like artificial. Do you like more natural bait to catch these fish? Do you like the fly better?
Summertime, we use the artificials almost all the time, you know, but in the wintertime, when you're in the creeks, you need bait. When you're out in the open, the artificials are better.
Now, why do you need bait in the wintertime? Are they more sluggish, or what's the deal there?
Well, we're in the creeks where it's murky and it's deeper, and they can't really see a crankbait. You know, you'd have to hit them in the head with it for them to see the crankbait.
As far as the crankbaits, is there any subtleties involved in dialing in the right technique for those fish?
I like topwater for the tarpon better than any other crankbait.
Sure, and that's again
where we fish is real snaggy too. If you've got a deep diving crankbait in the creeks, you're going to be getting hung up all day long. That's why I like the weightless deal too, because that can get into the structure, that can get into trees and not get hung up.
And Ashley, with you, working any type of artificial for tarpon, be it soft plastic, a topwater swim plug, what would you suggest?
When you see the tarpon, and it's different when you're not seeing them when they're in the back creeks, or when you're actually seeing them coming down the line, or if you see them, I think that getting it right at the right angle in front of them is really important, and just making sure it's a few feet in front of they kind of look up. And it's really important just to get them to see it. And if not, then I think it needs a little bit more action. Like if you're in the deeper creeks and somewhere where it's a little bit more murky, I think it's important to have something that, will get their attention, like a topwater, or even sometimes with the paddle tails, like that, action with the soft plastic can, if it's clear enough.
Very good. I appreciate that. Jim?
We never mentioned pinfish. Pinfish is a great
well, I mentioned the chunks, and you ran out of there like the house was on fire.
But live pinfish is a great bait.
How are you fishing
it?
It's
pretty easy to catch and pretty durable. Under a cork or free swimming.
Okay.
You throw a live pinfish into a school of tarpon, something's going to happen.
What doesn't need a pinfish?
Yeah.
I mean, everything
I
needs a
can't believe we
pinfish
forgot
out there.
that. I mean, that's a great bait for your guy in his own boat to catch, buy, and/or use, and they're easy to keep alive.
Now, you getting those real big pinfish or the little tiny ones? Or
in between, they're like mini sunfish,
like that,
yeah.
Gotcha. Are you putting them under a float, or are you casting them without anything on them?
Generally under a float. Even when you're out in the Gulf and you're drifting along, you put a couple floats out with pinfish, and you're looking for triple tails at the same time. you do different things different times of the year.
Harry, trolling those Rapala
I love
CD18 swimming plugs or the 15s, depending on the depth,
Yep.
crushes the tarpon.
Yeah,
it's an easy way to do it. You cover ground.
Yes.
So, Jim.
Years ago, there were these older gentlemen from Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and they used to fish East Cape Canal, and that's all they did was troll crankbaits, and they had success.
You
all
cover
the time.
ground, those
You
fish
cover
nail 'em.
territory. You cover area. You'll get double headers.
Yeah,
and
but we
stuff
got a lot
like
of
that.
weeds. If you do that out in the Gulf, you're hitting weeds, and it's kind of
No,
frustrating.
you can't do that.
One thing to tell your everyday angler, and we're talking about all these different techniques and blah, blah, blah. My saying for 2021 was, don't overthink it. Just do it.
Exactly.
Just get out there and do
Keep
it all.
it simple.
Exactly right. And that was a perfect way to end this session. I got to thank Captain Jim Willcox, Ashley Weber, the one, the only Harry Vernon III for that session on Florida Keys tarpon. We're coming right back with another topic for the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series. Well, there you have it. This week's Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series presented by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Now, adhering to Seminar Series tradition, you still have an opportunity for a chance to maybe win one of the many door prizes we have available. Go to nationalseminarseries.com, log on to the door prize banner, and enter your name and contact information. At the conclusion of the seminar series, we will computer generate the winners of those prizes. So get right down to it.